Quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. Run to the roar. Go after a dream that's destined to fail without divine intervention. Stop pointing out problems. Become part of the solution. Stop repeating the past and start creating the future. Face your fears. Fight for your dreams. Grab opportunity by the mane and don't let go. Live like today is the first day and last day of your life. Blaze new trails. Live for the applause of nail-scarred hands. Dare to fail. Dare to be different. Quit holding out. Quit holding back. Quit running away. Chase the lion.
In life, most days are ordinary. We go to work, we take the kids to school, we wash dishes, we hang out with friends, we spend time with family. Then out of nowhere, we come face to face with a lion. An opportunity or a dream that seems so big, so scary that our first reaction is to run the other direction. After all, we were just minding our own business, going about life as usual. It would be so much easier just to ignore the roar, pretend it never happened. But these are the moments that define our lives. It's fight or flight, and we have a choice to make. We can run away from our dreams, go back to life as we know it, and live with the regret. Or we can grab opportunity by the mane, go after those God-sized dreams, and live our lives in a way that's worth telling stories about. Buried in the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel is one of the most amazing verses, one of the most amazing stories in the Bible. If it wasn't in the Bible, you probably wouldn't even believe it's true. 2 Samuel 23:20 says, "There was also Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant warrior from Kabzeel. He did many heroic deeds, which included killing 2 champions of Moab. Another time, on a snowy day, he chased a lion down into a pit and killed it." One of the great challenges we face in hearing a story like Benaiah's is something that psychologists call the hindsight bias. We know how every Bible story ends, and because we know the ending, we often assume it was inevitable. Before David even volunteers to fight Goliath, we know he wins. Before the wise men follow the star, we know they find the Messiah. Before Peter gets out of the boat, we know he walks on water. And before Jesus is even crucified, we know what happens on the third day. Because we're reading these stories thousands of years after the fact, and because we know how every story ends, we lose the element of surprise. We lose the element of danger. We lose the element of risk. Some of the drama is taken out of the dogma. And the same is true of this story in 2 Samuel 23:20. We know that Benaiah is the one who walks out of that pit. And if we aren't careful, we assume it. But this has to rank as one of the most amazing acts of courage in all of Scripture. And it's more than just a life verse to me. It's become a life motto. Chase the lion. Let me zoom out and look at this from a wide-angle lens. Scripture doesn't tell us where Benaiah was going or what Benaiah was doing when he crosses paths with this lion. All we know is his gut reaction, and it's gutsy. Listen, lions weigh 500 pounds. They can run 35 miles an hour. They can leap 30 feet in a single bound. And they have jaws and claws. What I'm getting at is this. If you find yourself in a pit with a lion on a snowy day, you've got a problem. Probably the last problem you'll ever have. This is how it's going to end for you. But you got to admit, I killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day. Looks awfully good on your resume if you're applying for a bodyguard position with the king of Israel. Benaiah lands a job as King David's bodyguard. He goes on to become commander-in-chief of Israel's army under King Solomon. So he's the second most powerful person in the entire kingdom of Israel. But it all traces back to this defining moment. It's fight or flight. And nothing has changed. Are you going to run away from what you're afraid of? Or are you going to run to the roar? Are you going to let fear dictate your decisions? Or are you going to live by faith? That's what this series is all about. It's about chasing 500-pound lions that scare us to death, but bring us to life. I don't know what dream God has put in your heart, but I do know this. If your dream doesn't scare you, it's too small. Show me the size of your dream, and I'll show you the size of your God. I believe God is honored when we go after God-sized dreams that are destined to fail without divine intervention. You're going to hear some amazing stories and interviews in the weeks to come. But let me say this up front. We need to quit living as if the purpose of life is to arrive safely at death. There's an old aphorism, no guts, no glory. When we lack the guts to go after those God-ordained, God-sized dreams, we rob God of the glory that He deserves. Listen, you can do nothing wrong and still do nothing right. At the end of our lives, our greatest regrets will be the 500-pound lions we didn't chase. A fascinating study was done 2 decades ago by 2 social psychologists named Tom Gilovich and Vicky Medvec. Their study made a distinction between 2 kinds of regret. There are action regrets, things you've done that you wish you hadn't, and inaction regrets, things you didn't do that you wish you had. What they discovered is fascinating. In the short term, it's a toss-up. We regret actions over inactions 53 to 47%. But over the long term, when we look back over our lives, we tend to regret inactions over actions 84 to 16%. That's huge. In other words, 84% of our regrets are going to be inactions. And I might add, inaction is an action, and indecision is a decision. Let me put it in theological terms. There are 2 kinds of sin, sins of commission and sins of omission. A sin of commission is doing something you shouldn't have done. A sin of omission is not doing something you should have done. Listen, let's not commit sins of commission, but it's the sins of omission that I believe break the heart of God. Why? Because it's not using the gifts that God has given you. It's not seizing the opportunities God sends your way. Potential is God's gift to us, and what we do with it is our gift back to God. As we begin this series, let me ask a question. What 500-pound dream has God put in your heart? What lion do you need to chase? Whatever it is, you've got to take that first step of faith. I live by a little mantra, go set ready. If you wait until you're ready, you'll be waiting until the day you die. I wasn't ready to get married. We weren't ready to have children. I wasn't ready to plant a church. I wasn't ready to write a book. You'll never be ready. The issue is not readiness, it's willingness. There comes a moment when you've got to quit running away. You've got to run to the roar.
Far too often, we doubt our dreams and delay our destinies. Chase the Lion helps you understand why life's greatest fulfillment comes from living in your divine purpose. And you'll discover what happens when you fearlessly chase after your God-sized dream. With grit and gusto, New York Times bestselling author Mark Batterson delivers a bold message to everyone with a big dream. To thank you for your gift of $25 or more in support of the worldwide outreaches of TBN, we'll send you your very own copy of the book Chase the Lion. And for your gift of $75 or more, we'll also include 2 additional books by Pastor Mark, In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, and his latest book, Whisper, How to Hear the Voice of God, where Pastor Mark will introduce you to the 7 love languages of God and how he speaks to us through them, each one unique and entirely divine. Right now, you can begin the journey that takes you from your God-given dream into your God-ordained destiny. Hear him, follow him, run to the roar. Call or go online right now to share a gift and request these powerful resources from Pastor Mark Batterson.
I'm not sure what comes to mind when you hear the word faith. Maybe it's Moses extending his staff over the Red Sea, or Joshua commanding the sun to stand still. For me, it's Benaiah chasing a lion into a pit. Faith is spelled risk, and this story sets the standard. Let me share 3 definitions of faith. First, faith is the willingness to look foolish. It's hard to imagine anything more foolish than chasing a lion, right? But that's what faith looks like and feels like. Noah looked foolish building an ark. Sarah looked foolish buying maternity clothes. David looked foolish going into battle with the slingshot. The wise men looked foolish following a star. Peter looked foolish getting out of a boat. And Jesus looked foolish hanging half naked on a cross. But that's faith. Faith is the willingness to look foolish. And the results speak for themselves. Noah was saved from the flood. David defeated Goliath. The wise men found the Messiah. Peter walked on water. And Jesus was raised from the dead. Faith is the willingness to look foolish. And if you aren't willing to look foolish, you're foolish. It's the fear of looking foolish that is standing between you and your dream. I can't change majors. I might look foolish. I can't quit my job. I might look foolish. I can't seek out counseling. I might look foolish. I can't ask her out. I can't share my faith. I can't pray for a miracle. I can't fill out the application because I might look foolish. Now listen, you better pray about it. You better do your due diligence and seek out wise counsel. But faith often feels a little foolish. Here's a second definition. Faith is unlearning our fears. You can run away from what you're afraid of, but you'll be running the rest of your life. Don't let fear dictate your decisions. There are thousands of fears and phobias cataloged in the DSM-5, but we're only born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. That means that the rest of those fears are learned, which means they can be unlearned. 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out all fear. Love is fearlessness. I've always wrestled with the fear of failure, but I learned a valuable lesson when I was 22. We tried to plant a church in another state, but that church plant failed. It was embarrassing. It was discouraging. But here's what I learned. The cure for the fear of failure isn't success. It's failure in small enough doses that you build up an immunity to it. Somehow, that failure set me free from the fear of failure because I discovered that God was right there to pick me up, dust me off, and give me a second chance. I know some people ask the question, if you knew you couldn't fail, what dream would you go after? I think that's a good question, but here's a better question. If you knew you would fail, what dream would you still go after because you couldn't live with yourself without going after it? It's not about winning or losing. It's not about success or failure. It's about obedience. Let me share a story. More than a decade ago, we helped start a church in Ethiopia. We actually sent a mission team from our church. Right before the trip, one person on the team was ready to bail for a number of very good reasons. First of all, there was some political unrest, which made all of us nervous, and she had never been out of the country. So it was acute fear for Sarah. Second, we decided to end the trip in the outback, and she had never even been camping before. When we told her that we would have armed guards, it didn't eliminate her fears, it actually exacerbated them. Plus, we had to get some extra inoculations. Long story short, Sarah was scared for very good reasons. I still remember that meeting because it turned into a prayer meeting. We prayed her through her fear. So we go on the trip, and the whole thing was amazing. But let me tell you about one of the most memorable days of my life. We got up early, headed out of the city, and we stopped for a picnic lunch. There were some cows grazing in a field, and for some reason, cows in other countries are more interesting than American cows, so we took some pictures. The next thing I know, armed shepherds carrying AK-47s come running at us. They're speaking Amharic, so I don't know what they're saying, but evidently, if you take a picture of their cows, they want cash. They were cash cows. Listen, it was terrifying when it happened, but it was one of those experiences where right afterwards, it was awesome. I got held up at gunpoint in Ethiopia. Well, we continue all the way to Awash National Park, where we get on some Land Rovers and we start driving as the African sun is setting. And we're seeing animals I've never seen in a zoo. I don't even know their names. Well, that night, we gather around a bonfire and we're singing worship choruses. One of those moments where you can't not worship. That's when our guards come up and say, be quiet, and they tell us to listen. And wouldn't you know it, we hear a lion roaring, we hope in the distance. It was the most amazing trip, the most amazing day. In fact, I had a revelation that night as I got into my pup tent. I felt like I heard that still small voice of God saying, Mark, don't accumulate possessions, accumulate experiences. I've tried to live my life that way ever since. Now let me go back to Sarah. What if Sarah had run away from what she was afraid of? She would have forfeited all those stories, all those memories. Now, the funniest moment on the entire trip was when we set up camp with about 80 baboons. They were in the trees, they were running around, and as we set up camp, out of the corner of my eye, I see one of those baboons drop a bomb, and it lands right on Sarah of all people. Now, she has since forgiven me for laughing out loud. And listen, pretty nasty, but pretty awesome too. I mean, how many people can say that they have been pooped on by a baboon in the wild? That's living life to the fullest. Let me ask you a question. Are you living your life in a way that is worth telling stories about? When Solomon was a young boy, I'm guessing that David would tell him bedtime stories. And I bet some of those stories were about his mighty men and their epic exploits. And I bet Solomon asked for the chase the lion story more than once. 40 years later, Solomon becomes king of Israel. And who does he choose to be his commander-in-chief? His father's bodyguard, a man named Benaiah. The question is, why? Why does he choose Benaiah? I think he chose Benaiah because of the bedtime stories he heard as a child. He chose Benaiah because Benaiah lived his life in a way that was worth telling stories about. God wants to write his story through your life. You're a subplot in this epic story of redemption. But the turning point of that story is when you have the courage to chase your lion the way that Benaiah did. When we lack the guts to go after the 500-pound lions in our lives, we rob God of the glory he deserves. Listen, falling short of his glory isn't just sin, it's our small dreams. Again, show me the size of your dream, and I'll show you the size of your God. Let me share one last definition. Faith is taking the first step before God reveals the second step. In Joshua 3, the Israelites are on the banks of the Jordan River. They're a stone's throw from the promised land, and God gives them a curious command. First, he tells the priest to step into the river. We read it, and we don't think much of it, but I think most of us want God to part the river before we step into it. That way, we don't get our shoes wet. But faith is taking the first step. And that's where so many of our dreams get stuck. We're waiting for God to make a move while God is waiting for us to make a move. When National Community Church first started, I was both the preacher and the worship leader. I didn't lead worship because I was gifted at it. I did it because there wasn't anyone else to do it. I have a heart for worship, but not the voice. And I don't have the rhythm either. So our first year, our dominant prayer was, Lord, send us a drummer. Now, if I prayed that once, I prayed it 100 times. One day, as I was praying that prayer, it felt like God said, well, why don't you go out and buy a drum set? And my reaction to this was, well, as soon as you send us a drummer. See, I wanted God to go first. That way, there'd be no risk involved. Of course, that also eliminates the element of faith. Now, this is pre-Google, so I looked for a used drum set in the classifieds. At that point, our monthly income as a church was $2,000, and we were paying $1,600 to rent the DC public school where we met. Well, that left $400 for our salary and all other expenses. I bet you can guess how much that drum set cost, can't you? Yeah, $400. Now, I still remember my internal dialogue as I drove up to Silver Spring, Maryland to buy that drum set. I remember thinking, this is crazy. I'm buying a drum set for an imaginary drummer that doesn't even exist with money we don't have. But it was a field of dreams moment. If you buy it, he will come. The very next Sunday, a clean-cut young man walked in with a short haircut, and I could tell he was military, but I wasn't sure what branch. Turns out, he was stationed at the Marine Barracks with the Drum and Bugle Corps. Okay, we have a simple policy at National Community Church. If you play an instrument for the President of the United States, you don't even have to audition for our worship team. God didn't just send us a drummer, he sent us a rock star. And even more important than the rhythm we added to our worship was the faith that was multiplied. Faith is taking one small step and God turns it into a giant leap. I'm not sure what line God is calling you to chase, but it always starts with the first step of faith. One last word of advice. If you're gonna get out of a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night, you better make sure that Jesus said, come. But if Jesus says come, don't stay in the boat. Take a step of faith, keep your eyes focused on Him, and walk on water. Chase the Lion is more than a book, more than a series. It's a call to action. Here's the good news. You're one decision away from a totally different life. Quit running away from what you're afraid of and run to the roar.
Far too often, we doubt our dreams and delay our destinies. Chase the Lion helps you understand why life's greatest fulfillment comes from living in your divine purpose. And you'll discover what happens when you fearlessly chase after your God-sized dream. With grit and gusto, New York Times best-selling author Mark Batterson delivers a bold message to everyone with a big dream. To thank you for your gift of $25 or more in support of the worldwide outreaches of TBN, we'll send you your very own copy of the book Chase the Lion. And for your gift of $75 or more, we'll also include 2 additional books by Pastor Mark, In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, and his latest book, Whisper, How to Hear the Voice of God. Call or go online right now to share a gift and request these powerful resources from Pastor Mark Batterson.